The loud sound of the ambulance echoed to the quiet Hanoi street, cutting through the sultry afternoon air. Inside the ambulance, a white car with red stripes, 28-year-old paramedic Hugh was trying to stay calm while checking on the patient. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not just from the heat, but from the pressure of time. "Sister, please hang in there. We're almost at the hospital," Hugh said gently, trying to reassure the woman lying on the stretcher. Despite her pain, she weakly nodded in response. Her eyes closed. The ambulance driver, Long, with 15 years of experience, was focused as he navigated the crowded Hanoi streets, maneuvering the car through traffic. "How far is it?" Hugh asked. "About 10 minutes," Long replied, sounding determined. Suddenly, a dog jumped into the road, blocking the way. The ambulance had to stop abruptly. "What happened?" Hugh asked, confused. Long shook his head, unsure. Through the window, Hugh saw the dog standing in the middle of the road, barking and running back and forth. It looked like the dog was trying to communicate something. "We don't have time," Hugh said, looking at the patient's worsening condition. "Just honk the horn to get it out of the way." The dog finally moved aside, but something in its eyes made Hugh stop. "I think the dog is trying to tell us something," Long said, unsure what it meant. Hugh frowned. "What do you mean?" Long shrugged. "I don't know, but it feels like it's more than just blocking our way." After a moment of hesitation, Hugh decided they should quickly check things out. "We need to be fast," he warned. They got out of the ambulance, leaving the patient under the care of another crew member. The dog ran into a narrow alley, leading them further in. The alley was dark and filled with the smell of mold, with old houses lined up on either side. The dog stopped in front of a pile of cardboard boxes. Long and Hugh exchanged confused looks, unsure of what was going on. The dog started scratching at the boxes, almost like it was begging for help. Slowly, Long began unpacking the cardboard, and both men froze in shock. Hidden among the boxes was a little girl, only about 5 or 6 years old. She was trembling, looking scared. The dog lay beside her, protective. "Oh my God," Hugh muttered. The little girl had a high fever. "She needs to go to the hospital right away," Hugh said. The girl remained silent, too scared to speak. The dog gently licked her hands, almost as if reassuring her. "We need to take her," Long said. They picked up the girl and headed back to the ambulance. The dog followed them closely, never leaving the girl's side. Long asked, "What should we do with the dog?" Hugh looked at the dog and then at the girl. It seems to be her only protector. They decided to bring the dog along, placing it on the floor of the ambulance next to the girl. On the way to the hospital, Hugh and Long worked to stabilize both patients. The little girl was frightened, but the dog stayed calm, lying beside her and occasionally looking up as if making sure she was okay. After a tense ride, they arrived at the hospital, where doctors and nurses were ready to take them in. The dog sat by the door, watching the emergency room, its eyes never leaving the entrance. Long spoke thoughtfully. "Do you think the dog saved her?" Hugh nodded. "Definitely. Without it, we would never have found her." Long gently patted the dog's head. "You're a hero," he said. The dog barked softly as if acknowledging the praise. While waiting for updates, Hugh and Long discussed what had just happened. They both felt something wasn't right about the girl's situation. "We should report this to the police. This might be a case of child abandonment," Hugh said. Long agreed. Just then, a doctor came out of the emergency room. "Are you the ones who brought in these patients?" the doctor asked. Both men nodded. "The woman is stable now. She had a mild stroke, but thankfully, she arrived in time," the doctor explained. Then, pausing, he added, "As for the little girl, her condition is worse. She has severe malnutrition and pneumonia." The dog's body language was telling Hugh and Long something. They noticed the dog seemed to understand the tense atmosphere as they looked at the little girl. After speaking to police, the doctor continued, "We'll take care of her. We'll investigate this case further. Meanwhile, she needs urgent medical attention." Hugh and Long, both exhausted physically and mentally, sat down. Hugh thought about what the little girl had been through. Long agreed that finding her was the most important thing. Looking down at the dog, Long said, This dog is something special. The police officers arrived, asking questions about how they found the girl, and the dog's role in leading them there. When one officer showed interest in the dog, Hugh explained that without it, they might never have found the child. The officer was amazed. Long added, "This dog is not just intelligent, but loyal and brave." The police assured them they would investigate and find the person responsible for abandoning the girl. After the police left, Hugh and Long discussed what they could do. Hugh was determined to adopt the dog, believing it deserved a home after all it had done. Long agreed to help. In the days that followed, they worked with child protection agencies and the police to ensure the little girl, Mai, would be well taken care of. They discovered that Mai had been abused and abandoned by her aunt. Mai was finally in a safe place, and her health began to improve with the love and care from Hugh, Long, and the dog, whom they named Boem. One day, Mai asked if she could bring Boem with her to her new family. Hugh promised that Boem would be adopted too, and that they would visit each other. This made Mai happy, knowing she wouldn't be apart from her loyal companion. As Mai's condition improved, social workers searched for a suitable foster family to care for her. After weeks of careful evaluation, they found a compassionate couple, Mr. Hung and Ms. Lan, who had always wanted a child. When they heard Mai's story, they didn't hesitate to welcome her into their home. On the day Mai was discharged from the hospital, Hugh and Long were there to see her off. The little girl, still frail but much healthier, clung to Boem, the dog who had never left her side. Boem wagged its tail, sensing that something was changing but remaining as loyal as ever. "Are you ready, Mai?" Ms. Lan asked gently, kneeling in front of her. "We have a beautiful garden at home. You can plant flowers there if you like." Mai hesitated but then nodded shyly. She had barely spoken since the day Hugh and Long found her, but there was now a hint of trust in her eyes. "What about Boem?" Mai asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hung smiled warmly. "Boem can visit whenever you want. We promise." Mai turned to Hugh. "Will you come too?" Hugh crouched beside her and smiled reassuringly. "Of course, Mai. We'll visit you and Boem all the time." Satisfied with that answer, Mai reached out and hugged Boem tightly. The dog licked her cheek in response, as if saying goodbye in its own way. As Mr. Hung and Ms. Lan took Mai's hand and led her to their car, Boem whined softly but did not follow. It was as if the dog understood that Mai was moving on to a safer, happier life. Hugh and Long watched as the car drove away, their hearts full of emotion. "I hope she'll be happy," Long murmured. "She will be," Hugh said with confidence. "She finally has a family that loves her." As the days passed, Mai's new family sent updates about her progress. She was growing stronger, smiling more often, and even speaking more. She had started planting flowers in the garden, just as she had wanted. And every time Hugh and Long visited, Mai was waiting at the gate, excited to show them how much her plants had grown. One day, as Hugh sat with Mai in the garden, she looked up at him with bright eyes. "Thank you for finding me that day. And thank you for letting Boem stay in my life." Hugh felt a lump in his throat, but smiled warmly. "It wasn't just me, Mai. It was Boem who saved you. And you saved Boem, too." Mai nodded as she petted Boem, who was happily curled up beside her. It was clear now. Boem was more than just a stray dog. It was a protector, a hero, and most importantly, a friend. As Hugh drove home, he reflected on how a single moment of kindness, stopping to notice a barking dog, had changed so many lives. He knew that sometimes the smallest act of compassion could create the biggest ripples of change. And with that thought, he smiled, knowing that Mai's future was now bright, filled with love, care, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog who had once stood in the middle of the road, refusing to be ignored. Months passed, and Mai settled into her new home with Mr. Hung and Ms. Lan. She was no longer the frail, scared girl Hugh and Long had found in the alley. With good food, proper medical care, and a loving environment, she blossomed into a cheerful and curious child. Her laughter filled the house, and her once timid eyes now shone with confidence. Despite her new home, Mai never forgot Hugh, Long, or Boem. Every time they visited, she would rush to the gate, eager to see them. Boem would wag its tail wildly, running in circles around her as if celebrating their reunions. Their bond remained unbreakable, proving that some connections are meant to last forever. One day, during one of Hugh and Long's visits, Ma excitedly led them to the backyard. "Look," she said, pointing to a small garden filled with colorful flowers. "These are the flowers I planted." Hugh smiled as he knelt beside her. "They're beautiful, Ma. Just like you, they're growing stronger every day." Ma giggled and pointed to a corner of the garden where a small wooden sign read, "Baum's Place." "That's Baum's special spot," she said proudly. "Whenever he visits, he sleeps right there." Long chuckled. "Looks like BOM has a home here, too." As they spent the afternoon together, he reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day in Hanoi's crowded streets. It was a simple decision to stop and pay attention to a barking dog that had led them to a life-changing moment. Later that evening, as Hugh and Long prepared to leave, Ma ran up and hugged them both. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "I'll never forget you." Hugh hugged her back. "We didn't just save you, Ma. You saved us, too." As they walked back to their car, Hugh turned to Long. "You know, I always thought our job was just about treating patients. But that day, it was about something much bigger." Long nodded. "It was about listening, not just to people, but to the world around us." Hugh glanced back at Ma, who was now playing with Bo in the garden, her laughter echoing in the evening air. "I think we made the right choice that day." Long smiled. "We sure did." As the sun set over quiet streets, Hugh drove home with a heart full of gratitude. He knew that sometimes fate worked in mysterious ways, leading people to where they were meant to be. And on that day, fate had brought them to Ma and BOM, changing all their lives forever. Because in the end, kindness always finds its way back, and love, once given, never fades.